she was a complete stranger. I'd have sworn to it. A woman I'd never seen, sliding into the seat beside me at a wedding, whispering,
"Be my husband till midnight."
"Don't ask questions." And I said yes to a stranger. That's what I thought I was doing. But all night something kept tugging at me. A laugh that was too familiar. A phrase I somehow already knew. And halfway through the reception it hit me so hard I had to set down my glass. I did know her. I'd known her my whole life. I just hadn't seen her in 20 years. Let me go back to the start of the night. Because a moment like that doesn't mean anything until you know what I'd spent 20 years carrying, and what a stranger at a wedding cracked open. I'm Ethan Cole. I'm 36, and I make furniture for a living, tables, cabinets, the occasional staircase, work I do with my hands in a shop behind my house outside Columbus. I'm good at it because I'm patient, and because I care about the parts nobody's meant to notice, the joint that won't loosen in 40 years, the edge sanded so smooth your hand keeps moving over it without meaning to. I've always been better with wood than with people. Wood is honest. It tells you when you've made a mistake, right away, and it lets you fix it. People smile and say they're fine while the whole thing quietly warps, and by the time you see it, it's already too late. That's the short version of my life, and it's the short version of why I was at that wedding alone. The wedding was my cousin Marcus as well. Marcus was the groom, and I'd known his family forever. So I got the invitation and I put on the suit and I drove out to a restored barn in the countryside with string lights in the rafters and wildflowers on the tables. I almost didn't go. I'm the guy who shows up alone, sits at the singles table and slips out before the dancing. Because a room full of people promising each other forever is a hard place to sit for a man who let his own forever slip away without a fight. But Marcus was family. So I went, and I found my seat at a half-empty table near the edge of the floor, and I resigned myself to a few hours of small talk and an early exit. Before I tell you what happened, I have to tell you about Maya, because everything that night ran back to her whether I understood it in the moment or not. When I was a kid, a family moved in next door, the Ellises, and they had a daughter my age named Maya. We were 6. And from the summer we were 6 until the summer we were 17, Maya Ellis was the center of my whole world, though for most of those years I'd have died before admitting it. There was a gap in the hedge between our 2 backyards, and I swear half my childhood happened in the 4 feet on either side of it. We built forts and lost them. We caught fireflies in jars and let them go. We were the kind of friends you only get to be once, if you're lucky the person you don't have to translate yourself for, the one who knows you before you've figured out how to hide anything. And by the time we were 16, 17, it had started to change into something else. The way it does. Quiet and terrifying. A friendship you've had your whole life turning into something with weight. That last summer, the summer we were 17, we were right on the edge of it. I remember the exact night I understood I looked at Maya different than I looked at anybody in the world. We were lying in her backyard looking up at the sky, and she said something funny, and she laughed, and then she reached over and tore a blade of grass and started shredding it between her fingers the way she always did when she was nervous. And I realized she was nervous because she was lying next to me, and that maybe she felt it too. We had time. That's what you think at 17. You think you've got all the time in the world. We had about 3 weeks. Her father got a job across the country abruptly, the way these things happen. A promotion he couldn't turn down, and the Ellises packed up and moved to Oregon at the end of that August. And Maya and I were 17 and had no idea how to hold on to anything across 2,000 miles in a time before any of us really understood how. We wrote a few letters. We called a couple of times, awkward, both of us not knowing how to say the thing we'd been right on the edge of saying. And then life did what life does to teenagers separated by a continent. It filled in the gap. The letters got further apart. The calls stopped. She had a new school, a new life. I had my last year, then trade school. And the thing that had been about to bloom between us just quietly went to seed. Unspoken, unfinished. The great almost of my life. And I told myself, over 20 years, that I'd made it bigger than it was. That's what you do. You tell yourself you were 17, that everybody has a first almost love they romanticize, that the Maya in your memory is a story you've polished smooth and not a real girl. I got good at that story. I built a quiet, careful life on top of it. I made furniture. I dated a little, nothing that stuck. And if I'm honest, I never let anything stick because some part of me was measuring every woman against a ghost from a backyard in Ohio 20 years gone. My buddy told me once, "Ethan, you compare every girl you meet to somebody you knew when you were 17. Nobody survives that." He was right. I couldn't even argue. So, the wedding. I was sitting at my half-empty table, watching the band set up, doing my usual arithmetic on how soon I could leave, when a woman came across the floor and dropped into the empty chair beside me. I didn't get a good look at her at first. You don't. You give a person a second to settle. I registered a dark green dress, dark hair pinned up, the shape of someone sitting down close. And then she leaned in, close enough that I felt her breath, and whispered, fast and low, "I'm so sorry, I know how this sounds. Be my husband till midnight. Just play along, please. Don't ask questions." I turned to tell her, kindly, that she had the wrong man. And I looked at her, a woman I was certain I had never seen before in my life. A genuine stranger, and I opened my mouth to say so. And something in her face, or her voice, snagged on a part of me I couldn't name. Some door I'd nailed shut a long time ago. And instead of "You've got the wrong man," what came out was, "Okay." She let out a breath of relief. "Thank you," she whispered. "Really, just for a little while. It's complicated. I'll owe you an explanation. I just need to not be alone tonight. I need to look like I'm with someone. Please play along if anyone asks." "Who am I hiding you from?" I asked. She hesitated. "Just a flicker. Someone I don't want to talk to. That's all. Please." And so we played married. And here's where it started to work on me. Slow. All night. Because pretending to be with this woman didn't feel like pretending with a stranger. It felt like something I'd done before. We fell into an easy rhythm way too fast. She'd say something dry and funny, and I'd have the answer ready before I'd thought about it. And she'd laugh. And every time she laughed, something in my chest turned over, and I couldn't say why. When the food came, she stole a roll off my plate without asking, and I let her. And it felt so natural I didn't even register it as strange until later. She had this way of really listening, of catching the thing you almost said and didn't. And I kept thinking, with a low hum of unease I couldn't place, I know this. I know how to be next to this person. Why do I know that? We talked. Not the small talk of strangers, real talk, fast, the way you only talk to someone you've known forever, and neither of us seemed to notice we were doing it. She asked what I did, and I told her about the furniture. And she said, "You always did make things with your hands." And I laughed and said, "You don't know that. We just met." And she went a little still and said, "You seem like the type," and I let it go, but it sat there. The band started, and people got up to dance, and after a while she pulled me onto the floor. "Husband's dance," she said. "It's in the contract, and I'm a terrible dancer. Always have been." And she laughed at me, and I said, "I warned you, I've got 2 left feet," and she said, without thinking, "You always did. You stepped on my," and then she stopped herself, hard, and looked away, and my heart started going for a reason I didn't understand yet. And then, halfway through the night, it happened. We'd sat back down, and something across the room made her laugh, a real laugh. A big one. Head tipped back, and while she was laughing, she reached down and picked up the cloth napkin off the table and started tearing the corner of it, shredding it between her fingers. This small, unconscious, nervous habit. And I watched her hands do it, and 20 years fell out from under me all at once. Because I knew those hands. I'd watched them shred 1,000 blades of grass in a backyard in Ohio. I'd watched them tear the corner off 100 pieces of paper in a hedge gap when we were kids. That exact motion, that exact tell, the thing she did when she was nervous, I would have known it anywhere, and I had not seen it in 20 years. And my whole body went cold and then hot, and I had to set down my glass because my hand wasn't steady. I looked at her, really looked. Past the 20 years, past the woman's face where a girl's used to be, and I saw her. Under the years, under the grown-up version I'd walked right past. It was her. "Maya," I said. Her hands stopped. She went completely still. And she turned to look at me, and her eyes were already filling, and she said, so quiet I almost didn't hear it over the band, You remembered. Maya Ellis. I could barely get it out. It's your how is this I couldn't finish a single sentence. You sat down and asked me to you didn't tell me it was you. I know. A tear went down her cheek and she wiped it fast, the way she always used to. And that gesture undid me all over again. I know, Ethan, I'm sorry. I couldn't just walk up and say, hi, remember me? It's Maya from next door. It's been 20 years I've imagined doing that 1,000 times and I always froze. So I gave myself a part to play. It was the only way I could make myself sit down beside you. The whole shape of the night reorganized itself, and I sat there stunned. You knew I'd be here, I said slowly. This isn't you didn't stumble into the seat next to me. She shook her head and let the last of the pretending fall away, and underneath it was just Maya older. But her, unmistakably her now that I could see it. Marcus's wife is my cousin, she said. Small world, or maybe not that small. Ohio's Ohio. When I saw the guest list, when I saw Ethan Cole on it, She took a breath. I moved my seat. I asked to be put at your table. I've been sitting 3 feet from you for an hour trying to work up the nerve, and then I panicked and grabbed your hand and made up that whole thing about being your husband because I was too scared to just say my name. She let out a broken little laugh. And I have to be honest about the rest of it, because I'm done being a coward tonight. There's no one I'm hiding from, Ethan. I made that up. I wanted to know if you'd recognize me. Before I told you. I wanted to know if there was anything still there. Or if I was the only one who spent 20 years wondering. I sat there with my heart going and 20 years turning over and coming out different. A woman doesn't move her seat and spend an hour terrified and stage a whole pretend marriage just to see if a man remembers her if she hadn't spent those 20 years wondering too. She hadn't been a story I made bigger than it was. She'd been carrying the same almost, the same what if, the same unfinished sentence all this time on the other side of the country and the other side of the same wall. You wanted to know if I'd recognize you, I said. I needed to know, she said. Because if you didn't, if you looked at me and I was just a stranger, then I'd have my answer, and I could let it go. Finally, after 20 years. And if you did, she trailed off. I've never stopped thinking about you, I said. It came out rough, and once it was out I couldn't stop the rest. That's the truth, Maya, and I've never said it out loud to a living soul. That summer, the hedge, the night in your backyard when I had to stop. You moved away, and we were 17 and we didn't know how to hold on to it. And I spent 20 years telling myself I'd made it bigger than it was, that you were a story, that nobody carries a thing from when they were 17. My friends think I compare every woman I meet to a girl I knew as a kid, and they're right, and I could never explain to them that the girl was real, that what I felt was real, that I never got over an almost because we never even got to find out what it was. She was crying openly now, the way she'd never let herself when we were kids, and she reached over and took my hand, really took it this time, not for show, and said, I moved away that August and I cried the whole flight to Oregon because I was 17 and I was in love with the boy next door and I'd never told him, and now there were 2,000 miles between us and I didn't know how to say it. In a letter. And I've thought about you my whole life, Ethan. Every furniture shop I ever walked past. Every hedge. Every stupid blade of grass. She laughed through the tears. I married someone, eventually. It didn't last, he was kind. It just was never. I always felt like I was comparing him to a boy from a backyard, which isn't fair to anybody. We divorced 3 years ago, and when I saw your name on that guest list, I thought this is it. This is the universe handing me one chance to find out if I imagined the whole thing. So I got on a plane, and I moved my seat, and I lost my nerve and pretended to be your wife, because I was too scared to just be Maya. We talked for the rest of the night, all of it. 20 years of it, fast and overlapping the way we used to. She told me about Oregon, about the years, about the marriage that never quite took because part of her was always back in Ohio. I told her about the furniture, about the quiet life, about how I'd let every good thing stay at arm's length. 2 people who'd been about to fall in love at 17, finding out at 36 that neither of them had ever fully stopped, that the thing we thought we'd made up had been real the whole time. Carried in secret on 2 sides of a continent for 20 years. And the clock crept toward midnight. She'd said it at the start, as part of the game be my husband till midnight, and I don't think either of us had thought about it as a real deadline until it became one. But around 11:40, the band started winding down, and people started saying their goodbyes, and I felt the night tightening toward an ending, and I saw something cross Maya's face, a shadow, the old fear. "It's almost midnight," she said quietly. "I know. That was the deal. Husband till midnight." She tried to smile and it wobbled. "After that, you're off the hook. I ambushed you at a wedding, I made you dance, I dumped 20 years on you in one night. You don't owe me anything past midnight, Ethan. I want you to know that. I didn't do this to trap you. I did it because I had to know. And now I know, and whatever happens, Maya." She stopped. Here it was, the whole thing coming down to the last few minutes, the way it had at 17. Except this time I was 36, and I'd spent 20 years learning exactly what it costs to let the clock run out on the thing you want and say nothing. At 17, I'd let her fly to Oregon without ever telling her. I'd let the letters trail off. I'd let a continent and my own cowardice fill in the gap where the bravest sentence of my life should have gone. And I was not going to stand in a barn at 36 and watch midnight come and let Maya Ellis walk back out of my life a second time, because I was too much of a coward to say the thing. At 17, I said, "I let you move to Oregon," without ever telling you how I felt. I stood in that backyard, and I felt everything, and I said nothing, and then you were gone. And I spent 20 years regretting it, so I'm not letting midnight come without saying it this time. My voice broke. "I don't want to be your husband till midnight. I laughed, at how big it was, at how terrifying, and I said it anyway. I want to find out what we were about to become when we were 17. I've wanted to know for 20 years. I don't care that it's insane. I don't care that we just found each other 3 hours ago at a wedding. I don't care about anything except that I let you go once, and I am not doing it again. Stay past midnight, Maya. Stay a lot longer than midnight." The clock, somewhere, was creeping up on 12, and Maya Ellis, the girl from the gap in the hedge, the almost I'd carried for 20 years, looked at me with her eyes full and her hands, those hands pressed to her mouth, and she said, "I flew 2,000 miles hoping you'd say something like that. I've been hoping for 20 years. And the band played its last song, and midnight came, and she didn't disappear back into the years. She stayed. I took her hand, and we walked out of that barn into the cool night. And the deadline came and went, and neither of us cared. Because the whole point of a deadline is what you do before it runs out, and I'd finally, 20 years late, done the brave thing. We didn't fix 20 years in one night. I want to be honest about that, because the version where a wedding heals 2 decades is a lie, and there's too much real in this to cheapen it. We lived far apart. She was still in Oregon, her whole life out there, and you don't rebuild something from when you were 17 in a weekend. We went slow. We talked every day, the way we should have learned to at 17 and never did. There was a lot to work through. I had 20 years of a habit of keeping everything at arm's length, and she had her own fear. The belief that she'd imagined it, that reaching for an old dream was foolish. That didn't dissolve because of one good night. It took time. It's still, some days, taking time. But we did the work, because we'd both spent 20 years learning exactly what not doing it costs. She started coming back to Ohio, more and more. Within a year, she'd moved back for good, not for me, she was careful to say, but for herself, because she'd never really wanted to be anywhere but home and had let a job take her family across the country when she was 17 and never found her way back. She bought a little house not far from mine, and we did the slow, careful, wonderful thing of falling in love at 36 with the person we'd almost fallen in love with at 17, which is strange and rare. Because you already know the shape of the other person, you just get to fill it in with 20 years of who you've each become. There's a gap in a hedge back in our old neighborhood, between 2 backyards that belong to other families now. We drove past it once that first year and stood on the sidewalk and looked at it, and Maya reached over and shredded a blade of grass between her fingers without even noticing she was doing it, and I caught her hand and held it still, and she looked down and laughed and said, "I still do that," and I said, "I know. That's how I recognized you." And she cried a little, and I did too, standing on a sidewalk in front of a hedge that had watched us almost become something 20 years before. We married 2 years after that wedding in Marcus and his wife's backyard, which felt right, since it was their wedding that gave Maya the guest list with my name on it. She wore green, the color of the dress she'd worn the night she pretended to be my wife. And at the reception when the band played, I danced with her badly, the way I always had, and she laughed and said, "2 left feet, still," and I said, "You knew that when you signed up." And she put her forehead against mine and we swayed there while the whole party carried on around us. A stranger sat down beside me at a wedding and whispered be my husband till midnight, and I said yes to a woman I was sure I'd never met, and halfway through the night I realized I'd known her my whole life. I'd just been 20 years and a continent away from her. It turned out she hadn't found me by accident. She'd moved her seat and flown across the country and staged a whole pretend marriage, because she was too scared to say her name and too brave, in the end, to let another 20 years go by without finding out if what we'd almost had was real. The best thing I ever did in my life was recognize those hands. And the second best was learning, 20 years too late, that the girl I thought I'd made up in a backyard in Ohio had spent all those years exactly where I was carrying the same unfinished summer, waiting for one of us to finally be brave enough to say the thing we were too young to say the first time. She said it at a wedding, and I'm never letting midnight take her again.